The sun had barely begun its slow crawl over the jagged horizon, but the desert was already alive with heat. Captain Avery Ace Mitchell wiped the sweat from her brow, letting the coarse, red dust cling to her fingertips. She adjusted the straps of her tactical vest and looked across the sprawling military base. Concrete barriers, sandbag fortifications, and armored Humvees stretched as far as her eyes could see. Somewhere out there, beyond the perimeter, the unknown waited, unpredictable, ruthless, and unrelenting. Avery had been in the Army for nearly a decade. Intelligence officer, combat strategist, and team leader, she had done it all. But nothing in her training had prepared her for the reality of a battlefield that could turn deadly in an instant, like a live wire snapping in her hands. The tension in the air was almost physical, a thick blanket of anxiety hanging over the camp. The smell of fuel, sweat, and ozone from distant explosions seeped into everything, reminding her that war wasn't just a headline on a screen. It was alive, brutal, and utterly consuming. Her phone buzzed briefly, a secure message from HQ. Satellite imagery had detected movement along the northern ridge. Avery squinted at the monitor in the makeshift operations tent. There it was, a cluster of enemy units moving with methodical precision. She knew the terrain well. This region had been contested for weeks. Every mountain pass and canyon could conceal a trap. Every shadow could hide a sniper ready to make a split-second decision that would change lives forever. "Captain Mitchell?" came a voice behind her. It was Lieutenant Ramirez, her second in command, with a coffee cup sweating in his hand. "Recon reports suggest they're advancing faster than predicted, could be scouting for an ambush." Avery didn't flinch. "Then we'll adjust. Send teams to the high ground and coordinate with artillery. Keep the Humvees on standby. I want eyes on every approach." Her voice was calm, even as her pulse quickened. Years of field exercises had taught her that panic was a luxury soldiers could never afford. Ramirez nodded, tapping at his tablet. "Understood, Captain. We'll have updates in 10 minutes." Avery stepped outside, letting the early morning breeze whip through her hair. The desert seemed endless, a vast expanse of red and gold, with mountains rising like jagged teeth in the distance. The sun's rays glinted off the armored vehicles, the metal reflecting a promise of both protection and violence. She felt the weight of her responsibility like a stone in her chest. Lives depended on her decisions, her judgment, her clarity under pressure. She remembered why she had volunteered for this deployment, despite the protests of her family. It wasn't for medals or recognition. It was for moments like this, moments when strategy and courage could save lives. She thought about her younger brother back home in Ohio, who had always looked up to her. "Be careful," he had said, worry etched in his voice. Avery smiled, masking the fear she herself felt. "Always," she had replied. As the camp stirred to life, soldiers preparing vehicles and checking weapons, Avery walked among them. She offered nods and brief words of encouragement, small gestures that mattered more than they might seem. Sergeant Hale, her longtime friend and sharpshooter, gave her a wink and a thumbs up, though the tension in his eyes betrayed the worry underneath. Hale had been in combat before, and like Avery, he understood the stakes. Hours passed with a steady rhythm of briefings, scans, and communications. Avery's mind was a whirlwind of calculations, troop positions, enemy movements, supply lines. She traced potential scenarios on her map, plotting contingencies and escape routes. Every decision had a ripple effect. Every miscalculation could be fatal. Suddenly, the hum of distant engines reached her ears. Avery stiffened. She signaled for a drone feed. On the monitor, she saw a convoy approaching from the west, heavily armored, moving faster than expected. Her stomach tightened. Enemy reinforcements, or maybe a scouting mission. Either way, we can't ignore it. She called Ramirez over. "We'll need to split forces. I want 2 squads to intercept at the canyon pass. One team stays here to secure the base. Prepare medevac protocols just in case." Ramirez hesitated for a brief moment, reading the gravity in her eyes. "Understood, Captain, but if they're heavier than expected—" "They're never heavier than our resolve. We hold our ground, we protect our people, and we adapt. That's all any of us can do." As the day wore on, the desert heat intensified, beating down on soldiers and vehicles alike. Sweat stung Avery's eyes, her uniform clinging uncomfortably, but she pushed on. She checked comms, issued orders, coordinated with artillery units miles away. The constant drone of aircraft overhead, the distant thrum of artillery, and the occasional crackle of gunfire were now background noise, a grim symphony she had learned to navigate. During a brief lull, Avery found a quiet moment near a water station. She drank deeply, letting the cool liquid wash over her parched throat. Her gaze wandered to the horizon, where the mountains met the sky. In those peaks, she imagined both danger and opportunity. Ambushes could be set there, yes, but the high ground could also be her advantage. Strategy. Always strategy. Her mind briefly drifted to home, the quiet streets of her childhood neighborhood, the smell of her mother's cooking, the late-night talks with her father. Those memories were distant, yet grounding. They reminded her why she had chosen this path, why she endured the brutal heat, the dust, the endless tension. It wasn't for herself. It was for her team, her country, and for the countless lives depending on them. As night approached, the desert transformed. Shadows deepened, the temperature dropped sharply, and a quiet tension settled over the base. Avery sat for a moment atop a small dune, looking out at the battlefield that was about to consume them. She drew a deep breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs, the calm before the storm. And in that quiet, she reaffirmed her vow. Whatever came, she would stand her ground. The USA-Iran battlefield had turned brutal, unpredictable, and deadly, but she would never give up. Not now, not ever. The desert night was deceptively quiet. Avery Mitchell crouched behind the sandbag fortifications of her forward operating base, scanning the horizon with night vision goggles. The stars were obscured by the ever-present dust haze, and the pale moonlight cast long, jagged shadows across the dunes. Every sound, the distant clatter of machinery, the soft hiss of wind, the occasional caw of a lone crow, felt amplified, warning of danger that could arrive in an instant. Her team moved like shadows around her, each soldier following their meticulously drilled routines. Sergeant Hale checked ammo, Lieutenant Ramirez coordinated communications, and the medics readied stretchers and first aid kits. Despite their preparation, Avery could sense the tension in every posture, every shallow breath. This was no training exercise. The enemy was near, and they were hunting. The first sign came as a distant rumble, subtle but distinct. Avery's eyes narrowed. "Movement," she whispered into the comms. The drone overhead confirmed it. A small convoy of hostile vehicles, perhaps scouting for weaknesses, was advancing along the canyon ridge toward their position. They were fast, armored, and heavily armed. "Squads 1 and 2, take positions along the northern ridge. Watch for any flank movement. Squad 3 stays with me to protect the base," commanded Avery, her voice calm but firm. She could hear the unsaid fear in the silence that followed, yet no one hesitated. The convoy crested the ridge faster than anticipated. One vehicle broke from the formation and began firing toward the base. Bullets whined past the sandbags, embedding themselves in the dirt with sparks of metal. Avery's heart surged, but she stayed focused, calling for counterfire. "Artillery units, coordinate with Squad 1. Intercept the convoy before it reaches the canyon. We cannot let them get too close." A sudden explosion rocked the western perimeter. Shouts filled the air, mingling with the staccato of gunfire. Avery ducked instinctively as a nearby Humvee was struck. The heat of the blast scorched her face, and the smell of burning fuel stung her nostrils. "Captain, Sergeant Hale's down!" Ramirez's voice cracked over the comms. Avery's mind went into overdrive. She vaulted over the sandbags and sprinted toward Hale's position, bullets whipping past her ears. The ground beneath her boots was uneven, littered with debris and cratered from artillery. Hale lay face down, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood soaking his uniform. "Hang on, Hale, I've got you," Avery shouted, gripping his arm and dragging him to relative cover. A stray round whistled by, striking mere inches from her shoulder. She didn't flinch. There was no time. Every second counted. Hale groaned, pain etched on his face, but he trusted her instinctively. "Medic, over here, now!" Avery barked. Within moments, 2 medics joined her, stabilizing Hale and preparing him for extraction. Avery scanned the ridge again. The enemy was regrouping, preparing to advance again. Her mind calculated, predicted, and adapted in real time. Every order could mean the difference between life and death. The fight escalated. Mortar fire rained down intermittently, shaking the base and forcing soldiers to dive for cover. The hum of helicopters overhead signaled reinforcements were nearby, but their ETA was uncertain. Avery knew that until they arrived, it was up to her and her team to hold the line. She grabbed a radio. "Squad 1, flank right. Engage them before they reach the canyon exit. Squad 2, provide suppressive fire. Keep them pinned." Her tone left no room for doubt, no space for hesitation. A blur of movement caught her eye, a shadow slipping through the dunes, an enemy sniper. Avery pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering, and calculated the trajectory in milliseconds. She grabbed her rifle, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The sniper's figure collapsed into the sand. A brief victory, but the fight was far from over. Minutes stretched into hours. Each assault seemed more desperate, more coordinated. The enemy was relentless, but Avery's leadership never faltered. She moved between positions, checking on her squads, boosting morale with a steady hand and calm voice. "We're not leaving anyone behind. Remember your training. Focus on the mission. We survive together." Her eyes met those of Private Nguyen, the youngest in the squad, whose hands shook as he reloaded. Avery placed a hand on his shoulder. "Breathe. You've got this. I've got you. We all do." The reassurance steadied him, and he took his position with renewed determination. Then came the turning point. An armored vehicle breached the outer perimeter, guns blazing. Soldiers scrambled, trying to contain the breach. Avery sprinted toward a damaged Humvee, climbing in and taking the driver's seat. With precise coordination, she maneuvered the vehicle to block the advancing enemy, providing cover for her team. Dust and smoke clouded the battlefield, visibility dropping to mere feet. In the chaos, Avery realized the full weight of the situation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmatched. Every tactic, every decision, every split-second choice mattered. Her mind raced, recalling lessons from past deployments, from military history, from the countless women who had stood in similar fires, enduring, adapting, and overcoming against impossible odds. Hours felt like days. The enemy pressed, withdrew, pressed again. Avery and her team fought with unrelenting tenacity. By dawn, the desert was scarred. Craters, shell casings, and the remnants of vehicles painted a grim mosaic of survival and destruction. Through it all, Avery had one unbroken thought. They would survive, not because the odds favored them, but because she refused to let fear dictate action. She refused to let exhaustion and doubt win. The brutal battlefield had tested them, but it had not broken them. Finally, with reinforcements arriving, the enemy began to retreat. The air cleared just enough to see the first light of dawn crest over the dunes. Soldiers slumped, exhausted but alive, tending to the wounded, reloading weapons, and offering quiet words of reassurance. Avery stood amidst them, her uniform torn, her hands raw and bloody, her eyes bright with determination and resolve. She took a deep breath, letting the victory, however temporary, wash over her. But she knew this was only the beginning. The battlefield was unforgiving, the enemy unpredictable, and the war far from over. Yet one thing remained certain. Avery
Ace Mitchell would never give up. Not now, not ever.
The battlefield was a nightmare etched in dust and fire. Avery Ace Mitchell moved through the desert like a shadow, her uniform caked in sand, sweat, and streaks of blood from minor scrapes and burns. The sun had risen hours ago, but its heat did nothing to soften the harsh reality. The enemy was regrouping, and the earlier skirmish had only fueled their aggression. Avery paused, crouched behind the wreckage of a Humvee, scanning the horizon with her binoculars. Dozens of hostile fighters had appeared over the ridges, and armored vehicles rumbled ominously through the desert valley below. The intelligence reports had underestimated their numbers, a critical miscalculation that now put her entire squad at risk. "Captain," Ramirez hissed, crouched beside her, "they're converging on all sides. I don't see a safe escape route." Avery's jaw tightened. Fear didn't have a place here, only strategy. "Then we make our own escape route. Listen carefully. We create a funnel through the canyon, lure them in, and hold until reinforcements can flank from the east." Hale groaned, shifting slightly to ease the pain in his leg. "You really think we can hold them off, Ace?" She met his eyes, unwavering. "We will. We survive because we have to. That's all that matters right now." The first wave struck with ferocity that rattled the ground beneath their boots. Explosions erupted near the makeshift barricades, sand and shrapnel flying through the air. Avery sprinted toward a position closer to the action, her rifle raised and eyes locked on enemy movement. Bullets zipped past her, some striking dangerously close. The smell of gunpowder, dust, and sweat burned in her nostrils. Private Nguyen, barely 20, was panicked. His hands trembled as he reloaded his weapon, sweat dripping from his brow. Avery ran to him, yanking him behind a low wall just as a rocket detonated nearby. "Focus. Don't think about fear. Think about action. One shot at a time. You've got this." He nodded shakily, swallowing hard, and raised his rifle again. Avery knew the weight of responsibility rested heavily on her shoulders. Every life under her command was a direct reflection of her decisions, and right now, lives hung in the balance. The enemy wasn't just persistent, they were cunning. One armored vehicle broke away, flanking the base from a ridge Avery hadn't expected. It fired indiscriminately, forcing her team to scatter and regroup. Avery signaled for medevac, but the radio crackled with static. Their usual lifeline was compromised. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath. Then she heard the unmistakable sound of someone screaming, Sergeant Hale. She spun toward the canyon side and saw him trapped under debris, a piece of twisted metal pinning him. Without hesitation, Avery sprinted toward him, bullets whistling past. The desert seemed to close in around her, the heat, the explosions, the shouting, all amplified into a blur of chaos. "Hale, hold on, I'm coming!" she yelled, throwing herself onto the jagged metal, straining to lift it. His bloodied face looked up at her, eyes wide with fear and pain. "Go, Ace, don't," he gasped. "I'm not leaving you," she snapped, muscles burning as she heaved. Finally, with a grunt of exertion, she freed him. Slinging him over her shoulder, she staggered toward relative cover. Dust choked the air, her vision blurred, but she kept moving. The enemy pressed their advantage. Explosions shredded the ground nearby, throwing dirt and rock into the air like a storm of molten rain. Avery felt her boots slip in the dust, her hands scraped raw on her rifle. Yet still she moved forward, rallying her team with fierce determination. "Form a perimeter," she shouted. "We hold here no matter what." Private Nguyen fired at advancing enemies, his aim steadier now under Avery's watchful gaze. Hale, groaning, found the strength to cover the rear. Ramirez coordinated flanking fire. For a brief moment, the team acted like a single, unstoppable machine, a testament to their training, trust, and Avery's leadership. The battle raged for hours. The desert was littered with craters, destroyed vehicles, and signs of struggle. Avery moved between positions, giving orders, providing cover fire, and ensuring no one was left exposed.
Her hands ached, her lungs burned, and her vision blurred from exhaustion. Yet she refused to stop. Every decision, every movement could mean life or death. A sudden tremor ran through the ground, a massive explosion nearby. A rocket had hit the ridge, sending debris flying in every direction. Avery shielded Hale with her body, taking the brunt of the blast. She felt the sting of burns across her arm, but gritted her teeth against the pain. Survival was not optional. In a brief lull, she surveyed the battlefield. Dozens of enemy fighters had been neutralized, but the remaining forces were regrouping, preparing for a final push. Avery's team was exhausted, bloodied, and shaken, yet she saw determination in their eyes, the same determination she carried herself. Her thoughts flashed briefly to home, her family, her younger brother, her friends, all of them unaware of the hell she was navigating. She thought about the women who had served before her, who had faced insurmountable odds in Iraq and Afghanistan, proving that courage wasn't limited by gender. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, then shouted orders to her team. "Prepare for one last push. When they come, we hit hard, precise, and together." The enemy charged, their vehicles kicking up clouds of dust, guns blazing. Avery took aim, firing relentlessly, coordinating suppressive fire with Ramirez and Hale. Every shot counted, every movement was critical. They fought like cornered predators, using the terrain, the wreckage, and sheer determination to hold the line. Hours passed like minutes. The desert sun climbed high, turning blood and dust into a surreal landscape of survival. Then, finally, the enemy began to retreat, but not before leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Avery's team had survived, battered but unbroken. Exhausted, she sank to her knees beside Hale, checking his condition. He winced but gave a weak smile. You saved me, Ace." "I saved all of us," Avery replied, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the next threat. She knew this battle was far from over. The desert was unforgiving, the enemy relentless, and survival required more than courage. It required unyielding will. But in that moment, Avery allowed herself a brief breath. They had survived the brutal turning point. They had endured the unthinkable. And through it all, she had led them with the same fierce determination that had brought her here. One thing was certain, whatever lay ahead, Avery Ace Mitchell would never give up. Not now, not ever.
By the time dusk settled over the desert, Avery Ace Mitchell's body felt like it had been pushed to its absolute limit. Every muscle throbbed with exhaustion, her uniform clung to her in stiff, bloodied patches, and her face was streaked with soot, sweat, and dirt. Yet her eyes, sharp, vigilant, unyielding, scanned the horizon as if daring danger itself to approach. The battlefield had left scars. Craters dotted the landscape, wrecked vehicles littered the dunes, and the air still carried the acrid stench of gunpowder. The enemy had retreated temporarily, but Avery knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped for another attack. Every decision now could mean life or death, for her team, for the entire base. She crouched near the edge of the makeshift command post, consulting a tattered map illuminated by the fading sun. Satellite data showed hostile units gathering beyond the canyon, likely planning a final push. Avery's mind raced, calculating probabilities, potential casualties, and escape routes. Then it clicked. A daring maneuver could turn the tables, draw the enemy into a trap using the terrain itself, and cut off their advance. "Ramirez," she called, voice low but commanding. "We set up a diversion. I'll lead a small strike team through the western pass. The rest of you hold the base. We hit hard and fast, and we force them into the canyon, exactly where we want them." Ramirez's eyes widened, reading both danger and brilliance in her plan. "That's risky. We could get pinned down." Avery met his gaze steadily. "I know, but it's our best shot. We either take initiative or wait to be overrun. I won't let that happen." Hale, leaning against a damaged Humvee, groaned and adjusted his injured leg. "You really never give up, do you, Ace?" "I don't know how," she admitted with a grim smile, "but I'll make sure we all get out alive." The Western Strike. Avery, Nagin, and a small team of elite soldiers moved silently through the Western Pass. Shadows clung to them like armor, the desert noise muted by anticipation. Every step was measured, every sound could be the signal for an ambush. The canyon narrowed, cliffs rising steeply on either side, creating the perfect natural trap. The first signs of enemy movement appeared as distant headlights flickered through the dust. Avery raised her hand, signaling the team to halt. She crouched, peering through binoculars. Dozens of enemy combatants were advancing, unaware of the trap being set. "Timing is everything," she whispered to Nagin, who nodded, eyes wide but focused. "When I give the signal, hit the flanks. Don't hesitate." Avery felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the heartbeat that had become second nature. Months of training, years of service, and countless near-death experiences had honed her instincts. This was the moment she had prepared for, though no drill could replicate the raw intensity of reality. With a deep breath, Avery gave the signal. Explosions erupted along the ridges as artillery units opened fire, striking enemy vehicles and throwing sand and debris into the air. The enemy scrambled, realizing too late that they were trapped. Avery and her team moved with precision, taking out isolated units, neutralizing threats, and guiding surviving enemies into the canyon corridor. Bullets ricocheted off of rocks, the smell of smoke and metal filling the air. Avery fired relentlessly, covering her team while shouting commands. "Focus! Don't break formation! Push them into the trap!" Nagin, now steadier under pressure, fired with confidence, hitting targets with lethal accuracy. Hale, despite his injury, directed suppressive fire, ensuring no enemy broke through the rear. Every member of the team functioned like a single entity, a lethal, coordinated force of determination and skill. The enemy, realizing their vulnerability, attempted a desperate retreat. Avery, seizing the opportunity, led a maneuver to cut off their escape, forcing a surrender. The battlefield, once chaotic and lethal, now carried an uneasy silence, broken only by the groans of the injured and the crackle of remaining fires. Aftermath. The dust settled and Avery finally allowed herself to breathe. The strike had worked. Casualties were heavy on both sides, but her team survived. Hale, bandaged and exhausted, gave her a weak smile. "We did it, thanks to you." Avery shook her head. "No, we did it, together. Everyone here fought like hell. That's why we're still standing." She moved among her squad, checking on each soldier. Injuries were tended, weapons checked, and morale quietly restored. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in streaks of crimson and gold, a grim but beautiful reminder of what they had endured. For Avery, the victory was personal as much as tactical. She had faced the brutal realities of combat, guided her team through chaos, and refused to yield even when every instinct screamed to retreat. Her leadership had not only saved lives, but had proven, once again, that courage, skill, and resolve could overcome even the most desperate circumstances. Reflection and resolve. That night, Avery sat on a dune just outside the base, Hale and Nagin nearby. The stars were visible for the first time since the battle, piercing through the lingering dust and smoke. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos of the day, a rare moment of clarity. She thought of home, of her family, her younger brother, and the life she had left behind to serve. She thought of the women who had paved the way before her, fighting in Iraq, Afghanistan, and countless other conflicts, proving that resilience and leadership knew no gender. Avery allowed herself a small, tired smile. She had survived the brutal battlefield. Her team had survived. And in the face of relentless danger, she had never given up. Not once, not ever.
Her mind, already shifting to preparation for the next engagement, recognized a truth that had carried her through every peril. Survival required courage, strategy, and unwavering determination, and that was something she, Avery Ace Mitchell, had in abundance. As the desert night deepened, Avery arose, her silhouette sharp against the starlit sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, and new battles, but she was ready. She had survived the impossible, and she would continue to survive, because giving up was never an option. Avery looked at her team, saw the same fire in their eyes that had carried them through the day, and spoke softly but firmly. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we continue. We fight, we survive, we never give up. And with that, the silent desert seemed to acknowledge her resolve, a quiet witness to the courage, grit, and unbreakable spirit of a soldier who refused to surrender.